those hundreds of charmed talismans and heavy piles of boulders couldn't stop him at all. Fengxin and Mu Qing both reacted swiftly. Fengxin shot out his arrows, one after the other, while Mu Qing swung his saber, sending an air-blade strike toward him, then grabbed Xilian and ran. Fengxin then employed the same trick and struck wildly at the rocks as he yelled, "What the f***? How did he find us so fast?" "How should I know?" Mu Qing yelled back. "The red string! The red string! His finger is still tied with that red string." When it dawned on the two of them, they both turned back to see Xilian's hand, as if Xilian would let them. His other hand reached out and held on to protect that hand with the red knot, and he exclaimed, "You can't!" Fengxin exclaimed, "If you're tied with this red string, he'll find us. If you don't want him to catch up, then it must be untied." However, Xilian still held onto his own hand and said, "Even if he catches up, I'm not afraid. I want to ask him about this directly." Mu Qing's eyes widened. "You still want to talk to him?" "I think he'd have to devour you completely for you to fully understand just how powerful he is." "But I already know he's powerful," Xilian countered. "You guys won't tell me what that mural was, and you won't let me go near him. You can't convince me of anything like this." "He's a ghost king. His behaviors are abnormal. Normally people would stay far away with just these 2 points, without needing anyone to convince them of anything." Xilian extended 2 fingers. "2 choices. Either you let me go back and ask him to explain, or you let me go back to look at that mural." Fengxin and Mu Qing seemed to have recalled something terrifying, and one had his lips twitching, while the other's brows could not furrow any deeper. They both blocked in front of him, yelling at the same time, "We'll allow neither." Thus, Xilian rolled up his sleeves. "Since you both said no, then let's solve this with our fists. Who's first? Or will you both come at me together?" Mu Qing turned to Fengxin. "You first." Then he backed away to the side. Fengxin looked like he wasn't too sure if he could win against Xilian, but in order to rescue a lost youth, he would give it his best shot, so he gripped his bow. "Very well, Your Highness, pardon the insolence." Xilian also returned. Yet unexpectedly, before he even finished opening courtesy, something hot was tapped onto his back. Someone behind him shouted, "Stay still, don't talk." And then his entire person froze into an iron board. Not just that, his voice couldn't come out anymore either. Mu Qing came out from behind Xilian and said to Fengxin, "Let's drag him away. This talisman can suspend him temporarily, but it won't last too long." Fengxin was slightly dumbfounded. "Why did you ambush him? Didn't we agree to a one-on-one?" Xilian hadn't imagined that Mu Qing would immediately go back on his word either. If it wasn't because he wholly trusted both of his once subordinates, he wouldn't have been deceived so easily. "Who has the time for you to go one-on-one right now?" Mu Qing asked. "He's doing it on purpose. It's easy to see that he's dragging out time for Hua Cheng to catch up. Do you not see the state he's in right now? Completely infatuated. No matter what you tell him right now, nothing will go through. Maybe once they meet, Hua Cheng will only need to humor him with a couple of sweet words, and he'll believe him. Just like one enchanted by a fox spirit." Fengxin contemplated and felt that what Mu Qing said made some sense. He sighed. "Your Highness, it's not that we're deceiving you intentionally, but how he is toward you really is unseemly. I really can't say it out loud. Please, just come with us." "Let's go," Mu Qing said too. Mu Qing's words weren't a suggestion or a plea, but a command. What he slapped on Shilian's back earlier must have been a command talisman drawn with his blood. The command talisman could make the target obey the caster's orders, but in truth, it could only realize simple commands such as do not speak, walk, stop, run, and so on. The more complicated commands were harder to execute, and the talisman couldn't confound the mind either. Only powerful ghosts like the Brigade Immortal could perform such a thing. The two speed-walked with Shilian in tow again, but were suddenly stopped by a pile of rubble blocking the way. Fengxin saw the path was cut off and wondered aloud, "Why are there rocks here blocking the way? We can't go any further." "Weren't you the one who knocked down these rocks? Why are you asking me?" Muqing said. Fengxin questioned. "You were the one leading the way, so you're the one who messed up. If we've passed through here before, why did we come back around?" Muqing refused to be questioned. "What a joke! I don't know the roads here at all. How can I possibly lead? Weren't we just running around without direction earlier?" It looked as if they were about to get into another argument, and Fengxin waved his hand. "Never mind. I've got no time to waste my breath on you. Let's just dig through this." Huacheng was pursuing them from behind, so they could only go forward. Retreat was not an option, otherwise they would run into each other. Blocking roads was easy, but digging through one was much harder. The two made Shilian stand obediently in the corner, while Fengxin randomly punched, and Muqing, veins popping on his forehead, swung his saber impressively. It was no time before the path was dug through. Rubble rolled and dust clouded. They were about to call Shilian over, when unexpectedly, once all the dust cleared away, what stood before them was a red-clad figure. Shilian's eyes instantly lit up. It was Huacheng. His eyes were cold, and he stood with his hands behind his back. Silent and wordless, Fengxin blurted out on the spot, "Why won't you go away?" He was truly the very definition of persistence. He was clearly left behind in the dust earlier, so how did he suddenly appear ahead of them the next second? And who knew how long he had been standing there, waiting soundlessly as they cleared away that obstacle blocking their way to offer themselves up? Was this not incredibly persistent and creepy? Fengxin and Muqing instantly backed away for a long stretch. Huacheng didn't look at them. His eyes moved to the side, and he took a step in Shilian's direction. Fengxin and Muqing realized who he was here for, and instantly flashed to Shilian's side to block before him. They shouted together, "Don't come any closer." Huacheng's face was extremely dark. Usually, if there was anyone who told Crimson Rain Swordflower not to go over, he wouldn't give a damn. It'd be more weird if he didn't laugh and go over anyway. However, this time, it was as if he was genuinely wary and didn't dare to move recklessly, pausing in his step. After a brief moment, he finally spoke up, his words slow. "What do you two mean by this?" By his tone, he sounded fairly calm. Fengxin, however, was much more straightforward. "You don't need to pretend anymore. We know that this is your old lair. We've already seen what's with those divine statues and those paintings. We've seen everything." Huacheng wasn't facing them directly, standing sideways. Hearing him, the hands behind his back seemed to have jerked, two of the fingers curling up stiffly. He inclined his head and questioned softly, "His Highness also saw?" His voice was very, very low, and while it still sounded unfazed, it was a little cracked, obviously off. Shilian cried mentally, "No!" Truthfully, he really didn't see a lot, but Shilian couldn't move nor speak at the moment. He could only lean dutifully against the stone wall in the corner, looking like he was hiding behind the other two, afraid to face Huacheng and refusing to speak with him. Fengxin pulled his bow. That's right. We've now understood what intentions you have. In respect of you as a ghost king, if you should still have some dignity, please don't come near His Highness again. In this moment, Shilian's feelings were like a cottage on fire. Black smoke, heavy and thick. Hua Cheng should have noticed that there was something wrong with him, and Shilian could only hope that Hua Cheng would question him. But Hua Cheng seemed to not be in a state of mind to notice anything, and only said coldly, "Don't go near him, and what right and position do you two have to say that to me?" Without waiting for their response, Hua Cheng's eyes flashed dangerously. "But you have reminded me that we still have unfinished business to settle." The moment his words ended, countless silver butterflies shot forth toward the two of them, shrieking. Facing such a storm-like attack, the only option was to use a spiritual shield. Fengxin and Mu Qing both cried, "Shield!" That butterfly deluge was blocked by a formless spiritual shield and shattered into shimmering silver light in the air. They rapidly recrystallized into new silver butterflies and attacked once more, completely unstoppable. They backed away as they blocked, and Hua Cheng steadily moved forward, step by step. The whirlwinds, raised by his spiritual aura, stirred his raven hair, and it danced wildly with the gusts. Under the blinding light of the silver butterflies, the mad fury and violence brimming in his eyes was completely exposed. To just keep shielding like this was too passive, and Fengxin and Mu Qing exchanged a look, agreeing to attack directly. They held the spiritual shield as they charged, each flashing their own weapon. The three thus started fighting in this narrow stone corridor. Fengxin engaged with the wraith butterflies, while Mu Qing faced Hua Cheng. Hua Cheng flung out an arm, and the scimitar Erming appeared in his left hand, ready to strike back. This was the first time Shilian had witnessed Erming fight seriously. The scimitar was long and slender, chillingly murderous, its silver light threatening. It was indeed, genuinely, a wicked blade, overflowing with evil. This battle was truly exciting. Hua Cheng stood his ground in a 1-against-2 face-off, and Shilian watched unblinkingly with his breath held. Soon, the tip of Erming's blade flicked, sending Mu Qing's saber into the rocks. Although Mu Qing still had the hilt in his grip, he couldn't pull his weapon out. In his moment of shock, Hua Cheng had already swung his fist and punched him squarely in the jaw, sending his entire person practically flying in the air. The hilt finally loosened from his grip. On the other end, each of the arrowheads of Fengxin's arrows was snapped by the wraith butterfly's sharp wings, and there were ultimately too many in number, difficult to deal with. Victory and defeat were obvious at this point. From the corners, countless white silk tendrils slithered out and wrapped those two into giant cocoons once more. The more they struggled, the tighter the bind, and Mu Qing tore at that silk as he yelled, "I knew it was you who threw us into that pit." Fengxin exclaimed, "This isn't spider silk. This is..." It dawned on Shilian too. It was butterfly silk. Before cocoons were broken through for butterflies to emerge, a silken chrysalis was formed. That strange, spider-like white silk was completely of Hua Cheng's making, and it was probably linked to those exceedingly aggressive wraith butterflies. With the match decided, Hua Cheng withdrew the scimitar and jeered. "I threw you in to save you from disaster. At the end of the day, if it wasn't for your loud yelling that caused the avalanche, there would have been no chance of you entering this cave of 10,000 gods. Why don't you thank me for saving your puny little lives?" Hua Cheng's original plan was probably waiting out the avalanche, and once the snowy mountain had quieted down, he would take Shilian out, leaving Fengxin and Mu Qing behind to their own devices. Yet unexpectedly, those two had gnawed through the cocoon and made noise, leading Shelian into discovering them, which consequently caused all the incidents that followed after. If it wasn't for all that, Shelian might really have just followed Huacheng straight out, without looking at a single divine statue. Yet now, things had devolved into the worst-case scenario. Every secret was pulled out and exposed under the sun. Shelian's heart was anxious, but his body still sat obediently in the same spot. The cold in Huacheng's eyes was growing heavier, and he looked down on Muqing from above. He asserted in a light voice, "It seems the one with the talent for sabers is me, not you." Muqing's throat was bound by a few bands of white silk, his face alternating between blue and red from the strangling, foam leaking at the corners of his lips. He choked out, You? I see. I get it." Fengxian was also gritting his teeth. "What did you get?" Muqing said, "I get why this bastard hates me so much now. It's probably the same reason for you." What reason?" Fengxian demanded. Muqing said hatefully, "Because he's mad. Have you forgotten what was on that mural? He's that young soldier His Highness wanted to promote after returning from Beza Hill. His Highness had said that his swordwork was good, well suited for the saber." "What's that got to do with the hatred he has for you?" Fengxian questioned. However, Muqing stopped talking. With a loud bam, Huacheng's punch landed on his face, and he smiled chillingly, answering for him. "Because he booted me from the army." Muqing had done something like that? Fengxian was astonished. "What the f***? Why did you boot him from the army? Did he piss you off?" Muqing replied, his face covered in blood. "I only made him go home. It's not like fighting a war is a good thing. How should I know he'd end up this crazy, holding grudges until now?" Before he finished, another forceful punch landed with another bam, and his face was almost contorted. Huacheng smiled. "Think I can't guess why you booted me back then? Muqing's eyes flashed. Huacheng then snickered. "Isn't it more than obvious now who the useless trash really is?" It was as if Muqing was stabbed where it hurt. He spat out a mouthful of blood, then he said, spitefully slow, "Thank goodness I kicked you out. Otherwise, if we kept you in the army and allowed you to get closer to His Highness, were you just going to watch him all day with your mind full of unspeakable filth? Disgusting." Shelian's heart violently squeezed. By Muqing's last line, Huacheng already had his fist raised, but when the word disgusting was spat out, that hand froze in midair. Veins popped on the back of that pale hand. The fingers clenched and loosened, then clenched. A brief moment later, Huacheng said chillingly, "I won't argue with you on that for the moment. You just tell me now, honestly. What you both were yelling about before the avalanche, was that true?" Muqing's eyes abruptly widened, and he looked over to Fengxian. Fengxian also looked over to them, his eyes round and bulging. Neither of them knew how to respond. Huacheng said sharply, "My patience is limited. Answer me on the count of 3. 1, 2. That he would actually act in such a sweeping manner. Just then, Muqing thought of an idea amidst his panic. He cried, "Your Highness, run!" The moment that command came out, Shelian, whose back was taped with a blood talisman, instantly responded and moved to flee. Huacheng immediately turned around, and from the corners, 2 bands of white silk shot out, forcibly binding Shelian. Before he even took more than 2 steps, he fell to the ground. In this situation, it looked as if he was shaken and shocked this whole time, or was having difficulty accepting the truth. Or was unwilling to intercept the fight. It looked like he'd been standing there in a daze and had finally decided to flee, but did not succeed. But the truth was, he had never thought of running away. Both Shilian's hands and feet were tightly bound by heavy white silk. He lay sprawled on the ground, his black hair and white sleeves scattered all over. His bamboo hat had rolled to the side. Huacheng turned around slowly, and after a long pause, he walked toward him. He didn't take more than a few steps before Fengxin couldn't hold back and yelled, "Huacheng!" Huacheng paused in his step and turned his head slightly. Fengxin forced himself to plead, Let His Highness go. He's already suffered enough. Don't to him." Huacheng didn't speak. He went to Shilian's side, put his hands behind Shilian's knees and back, and swept him up, securing Shilian in his carry. Shilian leaned against his arm and could see behind the expressions on those two giant white cocoons. Fengxin looked like he was witnessing a lamb entering the mouth of a tiger, like Shilian was going to be ripped apart and devoured, and he started yelling. Muqing began trying to use his teeth to bite at the white silk again, but due to the harsh angle, it was all for nothing. Huacheng knew the paths of the cave of 10,000 gods like the back of his hand, and after many turns and corners, the figures of those two soon disappeared, along with their voices.